A lot of seekers know this feeling. You meditate in the morning, you touch something real and powerful inside yourself, and then you walk into work or school, and within minutes, the old patterns snap back like an elastic band. The peace is gone, the ego is back in charge, and you wonder, why can't I hold on to the consciousness that I experienced in the morning? This episode dives straight into that gap, the space between who you are on the cushion and who you become in the world. It's all about spiritual integration. We explore why the current of daily life pulls you out of your practice, how your old mental grooves reclaim control, and what it actually takes to carry your inner life into conversations, offices, classrooms, and relationships. If you've ever felt the frustration of losing your spiritual footing the moment real life begins, this conversation is for you. I want to start by saying something from my early days of my spiritual practice, and that may be recognizable. So I remember meditating in the morning, doing my spiritual disciplines, and I'm really feeling it. Feeling inner strength and joy and peace, and like really coming out of my meditation cushion, saying, "Okay, I'm ready for the world." At the time, I was studying in the acting school in Amsterdam, but when I went to school and I started mingling with the other students, I lost that feeling of that great strength and that amazing consciousness that I had. And before I knew it, I was back in my old ego patterns. It was so frustrating because I knew that was not who I was. And I was like, oh man, I practiced this morning. I felt it, but it just slips away when you enter into the hustle and bustle of life. And so I guess that's the problem we're discussing today is like spiritual integration. How do you carry over your practice into your day-to-day life and not get bogged down by your old behavioral patterns, your old thoughts and ideas? And of course, there's peer pressure. An office is also has its own pressures and things, energies that you have to kind of fight against sometimes. So how do you do that, Vajan? This is a really common problem, right? That many spiritual seekers face.
Yeah, it is. It is one of the big problems with transforming yourself in any way, is that there is a force in the world around you that is going to try and hold you as you were, rather than allowing you just to simply transform yourself. And there's logical reasons why that happens as well. So I think if you understand why perhaps it does happen, it will give you a little bit more access to understanding of how you can push back against that and how you can try and transform yourself.
Yeah, interesting. So if I may if I may do an effort about why, I thought about that as well. And I think one of the reasons is we live in a kind of mind-based world, right? We have a world that has its own way of thinking about things, and it has its own vibrations, and that's almost acts like a current. So when you enter into the world, you go into your office or you go into your day job. There's this current of how things are done and how you should behave and what people expect of you. And it's very hard to it's like it feels like swimming against that current if you really change your behaviors or you want to really change your consciousness. And so you have to kind of fight against the current of how things are done and how and what people's expectations are of you.
Yeah, I think that's very much true. And there's also the fact that there's this idea that everyone in the same culture shares a collective unconscious. So, from everything that you've seen and you've read and you've been exposed to, and the way that your particular culture operates and its values, none of those things are really explicitly spelled out to you that, Dutch people, this is how we do
Oh,
things.
come on, there's no handbook of how the culture functions. Come on.
But it's
I
it's
want to see
it's
that.
always there, and everyone who has grown up inside that culture is connected to that in some way. And so that's always why it's hard for people to come from the outside and integrate, in that they need to start to understand the way that current flows. And so it is a very real thing. And the other reason why we make it more difficult for people to change is because we are a social and a group-based being. And so, whether it's your family or your work colleagues or your friend group, the group of people around you actually, in some ways, helps to keep you from going too crazy. They
Mm.
try and hold you in place in some way, but it's not out of a malicious that they don't want you to change or they don't want you to grow. But it's actually in some ways it can be safer than allowing you just to follow your whims on any particular
Well,
day.
it's like an evolutionary safety mechanism, to
Yeah.
stop the people from going off in too wild tangents.
Yeah, and I was reading something that I thought really captured that idea, and there's been quite a lot of cases in America, but probably worldwide as well. But it's coming up in America where people have spent too long communicating with ChatGPT or any of the AI agents, and then over time, it's fed into them becoming delusional because there's no pushback, because the way that these AI systems work is they want engagement. So they want you to carry on talking to them. So they can be a little bit of like a sycophant and just agree with you and encourage you. And so you keep moving further and further into these positions until you find yourself out of alignment with the world around you and living
Wow.
in the illusional states.
No, I've
So,
heard about a case where somebody actually took their own life because the AI encouraged them to do that. The AI just fed into their own, desperation and everything.
yeah, exactly. So in some ways, it's not providing the pushback that the people around you that love you should be providing. And I was talking with a friend of mine as well who grew up in a very different culture from me. He grew up in the South in America. And he was saying that when he started changing and growing spiritually, people would say to them, like, what are you doing? Like, who are you trying to become now? And his mother would even say to him, that's not how I brought you up. And so you can see that it is a very real force around us that is trying to keep us as a known person, because all of us have this persona, and I really like that word persona. It comes from the ancient Greeks, and the persona I think was the mask that you would wear when you were acting in the Greek theater, and so it had a microphone like a megaphone that you could speak into. um, but everyone knew it was just a mask that you were wearing, that wasn't you. But it's funny that over time we've lost the original meaning of persona. And now like the person that we are in the world is really the modern day persona. So the ancient people would have known, oh yes, that is the character that you're playing. And it's not really you. It's a combination of all the experiences you've had, all the everything that you've read and seen, and the people you've interacted with, the situations you've found yourself in, those all feed into creating this persona. But this persona is not really you. And we've all felt that. We've all felt times where the character that we're playing in the world, it just doesn't feel right anymore. It feels like it's not really who we're supposed to be in the world.
Yeah, you can really feel that shift if you're going away from your true self, and it feels very awkward and uncomfortable. And yeah, I like that idea of a character, and somehow in those moments the role doesn't fit the actor anymore, right? It's like
Yeah.
you need a new role, and but I think there is a case to be made to have a persona. You almost need one in the world, right? You can't just come there as a completely blank soul with no qualities or no opinions or no whatever. You need that persona, but it's healthy to realize first of all that that's not who you really are, and then secondly, if you feel that is going away too far from where you're comfortable with, then you need to change something in that persona or have it more aligned with your true self.
Yes, and I think that is a big part of this journey we're talking about of transformation is as you start to reveal your true nature, you then start to see where the persona and your true nature are not in alignment anymore. And so that's where you start to slowly try and change your outer manifestation, because that's the reflection of your inner reality. And as you become more clear, as your inner reality becomes more clearly defined, it becomes easier to create your persona to actually match that inner reality.
Yeah, exactly. I have to think about this idea of grooves in the mind. I'm a big fan of records, of vinyls. As you know, I have a nice collection and like to play them. But vinyls have this beautiful technology of grooves. So the needle, we have to talk to the Gen Zs and Gen Alphas here who maybe have never seen vinyl. So there's these grooves that the needle goes into, and then of course the music is played. And analogous to that, in our mind, we also have these grooves that the needle of our awareness goes into, and that it creates certain patterns of behavior. Let's call them behavioral patterns or thought patterns. And when you start to become spiritual and start meditating and developing a practice, it's almost like you're making new grooves in your mind. You know, you're instead of your normal ego patterns or ego behaviors, perhaps you want to be more kind, you want to be more loving, more self-giving, and you feel that your practice is feeding into these new qualities, these new grooves. And when you're on your meditation cushion, it's very easy to keep the needle on these new grooves because you're consciously practicing them. And you feel like, yes, this is really who I am. And this feels so great. But then the problem is that the old grooves, they're still there and they are much deeper than the new grooves. The old grooves, they have some momentum behind it. We've been acting like that or thinking like that all our lives. And so whenever we go into our normal day to day and we lose that very conscious awareness of the practice itself, the needle very quickly shifts back into the old grooves. And we feel helpless to do anything about it. And before we know it, we're just following those old grooves again. And it's just a matter of practicing and practicing and keeping practicing until those new grooves become so deep that the needle doesn't shift out of them anymore when we enter into our day-to-day lives. And I've seen that in my own life, that after some time there was a certain breakthrough that I experienced in my spiritual practice where I could carry over, those qualities that I felt in the morning, and that I was no longer, felt that my mind was going back into these old grooves. And that is just, it sounds perhaps a bit boring for people, but the quality of patience and perseverance to just keep going and creating those grooves, make them deeper every time you sit in your practice every day. You're making those grooves deeper and deeper until the day comes when they become the norm, they become the baseline, the default.
Yeah, and it's that idea we even have it in our language of slipping back into an old way of being or slipping
Yeah.
back into a certain type of behavior. So in our culture, there's already this understanding that there are these grooves and these habitual ways of being. So if we think of when people actually go out from, they've done their practice in the morning and they're feeling really good, they're feeling in alignment with themselves and they're feeling strong and powerful. And then they go out into the world and maybe they go to their school or they go to their workplace. And what do you think of the forces or the types of situations that are most troublesome to allow you to maintain that connection with yourself?
What is the most troublesome? I guess it's the expectations that other people have of you. The way they respond to you is kind of based on, your behaviors of the past. And so you kind of come into this whole expectational field, like this is who you are. And if you are outside of that, it can feel awkward, or it can feel like you're exposing yourself, or it can feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it's even the same habitual conversations that happen again and again. So if people know you're into writing or you're into bike riding or into archery, and they don't know you truly enough to have any other topics of conversation. So very often you find yourself in this very repetitive types of conversation about, oh, how's your archery going? How's your pet going? How
Yeah.
because people, it's too complicated to have a really high resolution picture of every single person you work with. So you want them to be more like a tool than a real person. And so a few things about this tool. Oh yes, this tool likes horses. And so you can exchange a few pleasantries and maintain the persona. And then hopefully get them to help you with whatever you need them to do. So there's often not a real depth of relationship in those situations, and so I mean that's one thing that's gonna keep pushing you back towards being a more sort of a caricature of yourself rather than the real version of yourself. But yeah, then there's also your friends and your near ones, and the problem for them is they find it destabilizing if you're changing too rapidly. So if suddenly, in a very short space of time, you're suddenly talking different, you've got different topics of interest, you've got different hobbies and behaviors and things that you're starting to get into, it can make them feel insecure because they see that you're changing, you're transforming, and perhaps on some subconscious level, they start to feel as though that perhaps you're going to outgrow them, you're going to leave them behind. And so that can be one reason why the people, even if they really care about you, they don't want to be left behind. They don't want you to move out of their life. So they're trying to hold you in place so they at least can keep their connection with you.
Yeah, that's very true. And so, how do we change this? How do we carry over our practice? Are there some practical tips, tools, tricks that we can give our listeners that they can kind of like make that shift and really carry over their spiritual practice into their day to day?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is having very clear, like starting to become clear what your boundaries are, like what types of behaviors or conversations or situations you can handle, basically. Because at some point, if you're with a group of people and the conversation is going down or going in a direction that you're not comfortable with, you need to have some clearly defined boundaries for yourself, because you can't expect that everyone around you is suddenly going to come up to, this newfound level you imagine that you're living at, and start talking about, yeah, deeply meaningful and spiritual topics. I mean, most people are just trying to get through the day and, pass the time. And so it's not like that you can't have small talk, and enjoy just, sitting around with your work colleagues. But I think you want to. It's when you start to betray yourself by involving yourself in situations or conversations, or being around topics that are no longer aligning with who you're becoming. And so when you do that, you feel that you betrayed yourself in some way. If everyone is gossiping or talking maliciously about, someone, you perhaps in the past would indulge in that as well. But if you continue to indulge in that, once you've started to realize that that is no longer going to, it's just no longer going to work for you, that's when you really feel like, oh yeah, I really did something wrong here. I really, went in the wrong direction. So you want to start making those wise decisions. And one of the most powerful things is realizing at any moment you can walk away from a situation, you can walk away from, a conversation, or um, any of these things that are no longer aligning with you. Obviously you need to keep your work dynamic needs to be functional, but I think people start to really respect you and respect your values when you're actually willing to take a stand for them, when you're actually willing to pay a price to stand up for them.
Yeah, it
So
takes time and it's sometimes painful, but in the end, people do appreciate that and value that. Yeah.
yeah, so I think that's a big thing, because very often, if we are feeling insecure, or we're feeling um, just not really strong in ourselves in that moment, it's very easy just to go along with the crowd, and whatever, however that may be. But it might be that at your workplace is that, there's people sit around and, talk in the lunch break or in your breaks, and if you start to find that that's no longer working for you, I mean, you're completely free to get up and go outside for a walk, go sit somewhere peaceful, listen to some music, or do something that is actually feeling that it's supportive and nourishing and beneficial for you. But you have to be brave and you have to be confident to actually start doing that, because especially if everyone's used to you doing a certain thing, like sitting around with your colleagues, and then if you start doing something different, to start with, they may mock you, or they may tease you, or they may poke fun at you, and you simply need to have the strength of conviction that, I see value in what I'm doing now. I don't see value in the ways that I was behaving or was acting in the past. And so you have to commit to that. And like we said, though, if you do that, it doesn't actually take that long for people to actually start to respect. In the beginning, they will try and pull you down, or yeah, try and pull you back. But very quickly, when they see that you're actually committed to this new way, or a different way of being, they actually do start to respect that, I think.
And to balance that out, I think it's important to say that you shouldn't isolate yourself. So that was the
No.
mistake that I made in the acting school. At some point, I really started isolating myself from the rest of my classmates. I just walked away all the time because I didn't feel comfortable. And in the end, that was an untenable situation. So
Yeah.
you need to balance that out, take moments for yourself and walk away when you have to, but also connect with your colleagues in ways that are still, nice for both of you. And keep that balance, keep that healthy balance.
Yeah, because there is a really unhealthy relationships that happens in groups, where everyone is actually insecure in some way, and just simply will often go along with the way they think it should be going, the way they think other people think the situation should be going. So if there's a sort of a particular type of culture in your environment, it's not even that often it's not even that everyone fully believes that this is the right way to do things. It's just simply that they think that that's what other people want. And so it's like often in the group decision making, everyone chooses an option that they actually don't really agree with, but
Yes.
they simply think that the other people in the group think that that's the right option. And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
you can actually begin to become a change in your environment simply by showing that there are different ways. There are different ways, and different choices can be made.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised at who will take your side in that.
Yeah.
I think there's a few practical tips also. One of the things I would recommend to do is to consciously think back of your morning practice. So whenever you feel that you're slipping away or that you're losing your conscious awareness or your practice, really remember the meditation that you had in the morning or that beautiful prayer that you did or whatever it was. And when you consciously bring that into your imagination, it does bring back some of that energy and some of that consciousness. So really focus when you have a moment for yourself. You have to take a moment. Maybe you go for a little walk or you walk to the water cooler and really remember that morning practice and how that felt. And that is something how you can bring back in a few moments in the day the energy and the consciousness of that morning practice. And another thing is one practical thing you can do when you're talking to your colleagues is and you can do this totally secretly, like they don't have to know that you're doing it, but to feel that you're actually talking to their soul, to like their highest self. That is also a way to keep the practice going throughout the day without you showing it, without it's going completely in the inner worlds, completely secretly to the people around you, but you are practicing at that point. You're consciously talking to the soul. You're imagining, perhaps you can imagine a light in their heart or a beautiful flower or a flower on their face or whatever you want to, what shape you want to give that to. But you can practice during the day in these kind of hidden things, like talking to the soul when you speak to a colleague, or taking a moment for yourself just to do a little bit of meditation. Um, for instance, when you go to the bathroom to freshen up, or when you're taking a little walk outside, just to keep these small moments to keep the practice alive during the day.
Yeah, and then your day-to-day activities really begins to become an interesting game. If you're really trying to, if you suddenly take the same situation, but instead of looking around and seeing everyone as just an ordinary human being going through the motions of being at work, if you start to try and say, okay, I'm going to play the game of trying to see the divine in all of these people around me, you'll be amazed how quickly it starts to change your relationship with the people. Because one thing that people are desperately crying for is to be seen. They want to be really seen on a much more profound level than just, this is Janice from accounts, or this is the secretary lady, or this is, whoever the character is. When
Phil
you
from sales.
yeah, when you really start paying attention to the people and seeing them as a portion of this infinite divine consciousness, suddenly it radically will change your relationship, and it will change the way they will respond to you. And so
Yeah.
I remember a situation I had at my music store a couple of months ago. I came into my store and there was a gentleman in there, and he was by far the most serious man I have come across. Like, it's at least in the last 5 or 10 years. And so he was in there and he was wanting to look at singing bowls. And so he had such a strong mental energy. And he was so serious, his whole demeanor, his whole expression, everything about him. There was no lightness. There was no, jovial nature there. It was all very, very serious. And he had just so many serious, intense questions about all of the singing bowls and how they work, and about this one and that one and the other one. And I just kept on staying there with him and just really trying to see the good in him, seeing the divinity in him. And and you could see that he was someone who was incredibly frustrating for other people to be around, because first of all, he was overly serious. And then second of all, because he was so strongly coming from his mind, it was very, very difficult for him to make any decisions, because he was wanting too much information but then he was unable to make a decision because he was overwhelmed with choice. So he wanted to know about every single singing bowl they had. And I have a lot of singing bowls. So we went through it, and he was there for such an inordinately long period of time. And he's trying them. And then at some point, he's just overloaded with information. And I could see he was someone who probably has a really hard time making decisions in his life because he wants all the information, but the information at some point is impractical and it's not helpful. It crosses a line where it actually becomes detrimental to your decision making. And so, but I did not give up on this man. I stayed with him. I was just cheerful. I was attentive, and I was really giving him all of my attention. And so at some point he said, okay, I'm going to have to go away and think about this. And, I'm going to have to consider all my options. And I said, okay, that's totally fine. I'll always be here for you, whenever you're ready. So he left the store. And then maybe an hour later, I was sitting there and I was actually meditating. And then I looked up and suddenly he's standing right in front of me again. And I thought, oh, this is interesting, because he was the kind of guy that you would kind of expect that someone like that will go away and think about it for an inordinately long period of time. And perhaps he will never even be able to come to a decision because he's just paralyzed by all the choices. But it was amazing. He'd come back and he's like, right, okay, I want to buy a bowl. And so first of all, he was, just wanting to collect all this information, but now, and it was not that I had given him this information or told him some particular fact that had changed his mind to actually give him the courage and the strength. I think it was just simply that I really paid attention to him. I was really trying to see the good in him. And so he just then very spontaneously said, okay, yeah, I think I like this one, so I'm going to take this one. And I could tell that it was totally out of character for him.
Yeah.
Even he was shocked with himself. And unbelievable that he had actually spontaneously said, right, no, I want to get one. Because he said, oh, I'll need to think about this for a few days. And then, perhaps I'll come back in a few weeks. And so it was so amazing. I thought that simply giving him my attention and not judging him,
not judging him also. Yeah.
I wasn't judging him. I was just like, okay, this is who he is and this is who he's being at this moment. And then he's actually started to open up to me, and he told me all sorts of very interesting and miraculous things that I'm sure that he would not have told me if it was if interaction was any type of normal interaction he'd had. And so he was someone who was actually very profound and deep, but I'm sure that he finds it very difficult to talk to people because he was just, his demeanor is just far too serious. So that was amazing. I thought it was really interesting, just simply being very attentive to the world around you and always trying to see the good in it, trying to see the divine in others actually allows people to actually start to reveal their true selves.
Yeah. So what kind of miraculous things did he tell you?
Oh, he told me that he'd actually, I would never have believed this, that he'd actually been to India and that he'd had an amazing time there. He'd been to Arunachala, which is the sacred mountain in the south of India, and he'd spent several weeks there meditating. And so you would never have guessed it from the outer demeanor of the man. You would not imagine that, he had had this experience, but yet here he was.
He did. Yeah. Amazing. Wow. Yeah, so what I really admire in you is you can see you're like a persona whisperer. You can immediately see when somebody comes in the character that they're playing, and you have a very keen observation talent about that. And you always joke to us about the character that we're playing, and you're always we always keep us on our toes to just be aware that's just a character. It's not who you really are, and it's good to remind us sometimes of that.
Yeah. I even had one more interesting, I'll just tell it very short, in a short way. On the weekend, I had this gentleman came in, he had a motorcycle t-shirt on, some motorcycle brand, plain blue jeans, pulled up very high, a big leather belt. It was a guy in his 50s or maybe early 60s, short hair, very, just someone who you would imagine, would enjoy drinking beer, motorcycles, cars, sports. not a guy you would particularly guess would have any esoteric side to him. But he was in the shop, and I was really just watching him, and he was there for a while, trying a few different things, and then I got the sense he wanted to have a chat about things. So we started talking about things, and we started to get onto a few more juicy esoteric topics. And then it came out. I started with saying some things about Egypt. He told me, actually, I was one of the pharaohs who built some of the pyramids. And
Holy cow.
it's like,
You got one of the architects of the pyramids in
like
there?
so unlikely. And he went through it, and he told me from a very young age he could see and feel so many of his past lives. He could remember at least 50 of his previous incarnations. And it turned out he was the most interesting and remarkable character. He's telling me about some of his lives as a philosopher in ancient Greece and this, that, and the other thing. And I asked him, my friend, how many people have you told these things to? And he told me in his whole life, he's a 6-year-old man, he's only ever told 5 people
So,
about these experiences that he's been
and he
having.
told you within the hour.
Yeah, he told me very quickly. So that's the
Wow.
thing. People are actually always looking for an opportunity to be seen and to be appreciated. The true deep aspect of themselves. If they can sense that you are trying to not just pigeonhole them as the persona, and that you're curious. Like, that's the thing. Like, I have a real curiosity about people. And so that's the thing. Like, when someone comes in, I never dismiss them offhand as being not an interesting person. I know that every single human being is radically complex and deep and fascinating in ways that you really can't imagine. And so because I have that philosophy, it constantly plays out that these people, people can totally surprise you if you give them the chance.
But even Janice from accounts and Phil from sales, like,
Yeah,
those guys,
exactly.
you've been knowing them for years.
Yeah,
They're
you
just
have, you have to allow them their true, inner beauty to blossom out.
lovely. Have we said everything that we wanted to say about this problem?
Yeah, like, I think it is a problem, but it's also an opportunity. Because
In which way?
it's an opportunity for you to really redefine yourself, and to really truly know yourself, and to develop strength, courage, and to really it forces you in some way to integrate yourself properly. Because when you start to feel this dynamic at play, you start to realize, okay, the way through is by really stepping into my true self, and to really make that my persona as well, like to bring all of the parts of you being together. So I
Yeah.
think it's a wonderful thing.
The outer world is the field of manifestation. It's where the game actually happens. So you're preparing yourself in your spiritual practice. You're gathering all your soldiers together, all your qualities, and then you're going out into battle almost
Yeah.
into the outer world, into your office where you meet Janice from accounts and Phil from sales and all the other colleagues. And you're
Yeah.
trying to play the cosmic game with them. So it's
Exactly.
and becomes more and more interesting as your consciousness evolves. So super. So I wanted to move over to the aphorism of the week, and the one we selected this week. Let me just quickly pull it up. Oh yes. Not what happens to you, but how you accept it is of paramount importance. Not what happens to you, but how you accept it is of paramount importance. This one by Sri Chinmoy. He wrote actually thousands of these aphorisms, little spiritual poems. And this one is one of my favorites, actually, because it's such a beautiful map for life. It's such great advice to not what happens to you, because everything happens to us in life. Like, we can never control whatever comes to us, and it can be good things and bad things. And if you start worrying about bad things that may happen to you, you don't have a life. You'll be eaten by anxieties and worries. But if you just are, you take the position of whatever happens to me, I will accept it cheerfully and happily and perhaps even gratefully, because these things help me grow. These things help me in some way become a better human being. What do you say?
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And it's a topic that we've come back to many times. And even some of our early listeners may remember that the original name of this podcast was The Acceptance of Life.
There we
So
go.
right from the get-go, we have been promoting this idea that it's the acceptance of life that, first of all, frees us from that worry and that stress and that sense of needing to control. Because the thing that is going to make you go mad in life and is really going to take away all of your inner peace and your poise and your joy and your happiness is the attempt to control the universe. So as soon as you try and control everything around you, you are trying to grasp hold of something that you should not be. It's like trying to grasp hold of water. It's like there's this tremendous flow of energy and water coming into your life, and you're trying to stop it and grab it and control it with your hands. It's never going to work. And all it's going to do is you're going to use a tremendous amount of energy fighting against something which should not be fought against.
And Bruce Lee said, be water, my friend.
Yeah, exactly. You need to become, you need to move with the flow of reality. So if the universe is offering you particular types of experiences, you could on one hand curse the universe and say, this universe is wrong and I should not be having these experiences, and this is not what I came here for and this is not what I want. But you're wrestling with an elephant, and you're telling the elephant that he's doing it wrong. It's like there's a force that's so much stronger than you, namely the universe and its manifestation. And it seems fighting against what is actually what is always a poor choice of your energy and your time. You may not be happy about it. You may have thought or wished for things to be somehow different, but you have to accept it. Because what is has the whole force of the universe behind it, and so you have to play with the cards you're given, and so you can't magically change those and magically wish they were somehow different. So it is the most powerful strategy. And it goes back to that quote from Einstein that we've touched on many times, that a lot of it comes down to your relationship with the universe. If you think that the universe is your enemy and it's simply seeking to destroy you, well, then of course you're going to be unhappy with when a lot of things will happen in your life. You lose your job, or your pet dies, or you get robbed, or you lose millions in some crypto scheme. Whatever it is that happened to you. If you take the universe as your enemy, you will be unhappy and you will feel like a victim and you will feel downtrodden and you will feel powerless. Whereas if you take the position that, no, the universe is my dearest friend. The universe knows me far better than I know myself. And the universe will give me experiences that, although they may seem strange and difficult and trying and problematic, the universe has my best interests at heart. And it is going to teach me something through these experiences. And so that's the big thing. If you think there is something valuable to facing up to these experiences, you will willingly, and perhaps not always willingly, but you will take a position of accepting these things and dealing with them in the best way that you can. And that seems, as a strategy, that seems infinitely wiser than somehow trying to fight against reality.
Yeah. And so there's also a message of transformation hidden inside acceptance, right? When we accept life, it starts to transform. It actually starts losing its fangs and its bitterness, and it actually becomes sweeter. And so 3 years ago, I broke my hip. I had a bike accident in Croatia. I fell off my road bike and broke my hip. And I could have, shaken my fist at the universe. Why does this happen to me? And, I'm in Croatia. And so, but I decided right then, I remember once I realized, okay, I immediately saw my future change. It was like, okay, the next 6 to 8 weeks, they're going to be completely different. I will not be able to go to work. I will be mostly like limping around on crutches and have a long recovery process. But I immediately thought, okay, this is just the game the universe wants me to play now. It's just a different game. And I have to roll with the punches. That's kind of a negative way to say it, but you do have to, like the reed, you have to bend with the wind. And I decided, okay, I'm going to put all my energy into recovery. And I did that from day one. I started to, do the physiotherapy and just like focusing on recovery. And I saw myself improving. And then after a few weeks, I could I was walking on crutches, and then eventually got rid of the crutches. And the funny thing was, it went so quickly, I think also because I decided that this is something positive that I was going to do, that within 6 months after breaking my hip, I did a triathlon. And it was an Olympic triathlon in my hometown in Amsterdam. And there was also a national championships, and I actually became second place in my age group. And so from having broken my hip, and 6 months later, I was doing a triathlon, I was like, wow, this is magical. It's like so quickly things changed around. And I think it's to that effect of accepting the reality makes the reality less problematic. And even if something really bad happens, if you can't truly accept it, it becomes much easier to deal with. And it resolves also much faster that way.
Yeah, and I remember that time, and I think people were very impressed, and really, it was really admirable how you cheerfully accepted the situation, and how very quickly you transformed it and were back exercising and back doing things, because that's one of the things that people really notice. If you're someone where something happens to you and you spend, an inordinate amount of time complaining about it and moaning about it and asking, why did this have to happen? That doesn't impress anybody. Like, anyone looking at that situation, it feels slightly awkward, and they just feel sorry for you. They just see, oh, what a sad state of affairs. Whereas if they see you do have the exact same experience, but you take it on the chin and you say, right, okay, this is what's happened, and I accept that, and I'm going to move forward and be as productive and do as much as I can. People really look to that, and it's something that they see some real good character in that. So yeah, that was a good reflection, and it
Well,
reflected
thank you.
well.
Yeah, thank you. We had a great teacher who taught us the acceptance of life, right? Sri Chinmoy was all about the acceptance of life. So that's great. I just wanted to end today with, if I may, with a spiritual story.
Nice.
And I actually found one from our favorite tradition, the Zen tradition. We love
Oh,
the Zen stories. And so
wow.
this is one that I came across, and it's quite short. It's called Working Very Hard. And so I'll just read it out. A martial arts student went to his teacher and said earnestly, I'm devoted to studying your martial system. How long will it take me to master it? And the teacher's reply was casual, 10 years. Now, impatiently, the student answered, but I want to master it faster than that. I will work very hard. I'll practice every day, 10 or more hours a day if I have to. How long will it take then? The teacher thought for a moment, and then he said, 20 years.
Yes, that is the type of story that we love here.
Yeah. How do you take that? What is the lesson here?
Yeah, this is when you're going against nature, when you're going against the natural way of things. There is a natural way of things, and when we try and go against that and force our will upon it, we think somehow we're going to outsmart Mother Nature, or we're going to outsmart reality. But it never works like that. It always is counterproductive. And so that was the master's wisdom. He saw that this gentleman, the lesson perhaps he needed to learn was patience, and
Yeah.
patience perhaps was going to take 20 years for him to learn. So immediately see it, this guy was on a longer road rather than a shorter road. That there's so many situations like that for all of us where
Yeah.
we would like something immediately, but the more we try and force it, the more it slips through our grasp. And so
Yeah.
we need to learn to go with the grain rather than against it.
Yeah, exactly. There was once an analogy I heard somebody talk about. There was this experiment that scientists did with a rat, and then with a piece of food that the rat liked, and they put a glass between him and the food. So the rat would, in the beginning, he would bump his head against the glass all the time, trying to get to the food. But then after some time, he realized, actually, the only way to get to the food is walk all the way around the glass. And so sometimes to get to your goal, you have to take a longer route, which feels longer than the shortcut. There's no shortcut. There was no way to get directly to the food. And so I think for many people, we want to get to our goals right away, immediately. We want to have it now. But that's unfortunately not the way that the universe works. And sometimes we have to spend those 10 years, and then the goal is there for us to enjoy, and it just takes its time.
Great. Thanks for sharing that story. I like that one. That's a good one.
Lovely. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of today's podcast.
Thank
Did you
you.
have anything else to say or to add?
No, I told a couple of little tidbits from my working life, and I was happy.
Yeah. Lovely. Okay, thank you very much for joining us so far. And we're back to doing once a week. We're trying to get one out every week. So if you like this podcast, then you can subscribe. You can give us stars on your favorite podcast app. And we'll see you again next week, hopefully. Bye, everyone.
You.